Good afternoon, friends, and well-wishers of the department, and all of you gathered here. At the outset, it's my pleasure to have Sri Abhinav Pandya, and it's been a while that I've been thinking of having him here since I came across his book, which was extremely interesting. Sri Abhinav Pandya is the founder and CEO of Usana's Foundation, an India-based geopolitical and security affairs think tank, and the author of Radicalization in India and Exploration. Now, his second book, Terror Financing in Kashmir, will be released soon. He's an MPA from the Cornell University, United States of America. His work has featured in some of the prominent places, including that of National Interest, Economic Times, and Fair Observer emanating from the United States. Harrods from Israel, South Asia Democratic Forum from Brussels, The Print, HW News, Sunday Guardian, Quint, the VIF, that's Vivekananda International Foundation, Policy Perspective Foundation, Perspectives on Terrorism, Huffington Post, also emanating from the United States, Express Tribune from Pakistan, Park Tea House, again from Pakistan, First Post and Swarajya. He is a regular face who appears as panelist on India's national television debates on security and strategic affairs. Yesterday, a number of people remembered him because recently he had spoken about why Indian leadership should talk to the Kashmiris and also initiate a dialogue. So there was a whole discussion that he was part of, due to which a lot of them spoke about and said it's an extremely timely talk that we are having Mr. Abhinav Pandya in the department. And he tweets at Abhinav Pandya, so all of you can have as well access. This is his first interaction with the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations. So on behalf of the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations and Manipal Academy of Higher Education, I heartily welcome you, Abhinav. The Department of Geopolitics and International Relations has been a teaching department with having MA and PhD programs since 2010. And we have made steady progress over a period of time with having unique type of a program altogether, because no Indian university teaches geopolitics, and we wanted to do that one. And people like PM Heblikar, Group Captain Chandrasekhar, and all of them have been part of us, and they're aware of the type of work we are doing. We're extremely happy to have you here, and we will have many more interactions. We look forward to your book as well. We'll have a book discussion, and over to you, Mr. Abhinav.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nankishore, and I would also like to thank Manipal for inviting me and giving me this opportunity. In fact, even at Sanas, we have a close, I would say, relationship, not formally with the institution, but we have Mr. Madhav Nalapad, who is associated with Manipal. So I was actually giving my thanks to Dr. Nankishore and Manipal University for giving me this opportunity on such a wonderful and a very relevant and a critical topic. So I was giving my thanks to Dr. Nankishore and Manipal University for inviting me for this wonderful topic and a very relevant topic for this lecture. So I'll just start without wasting much time. So I believe that over the last 4, 5, 6 years, I have focused mostly on radicalization and terrorism issues. And during the course of my study and field research, I found that this is one of the most critical and one of the most dangerous existential threat as far as our country is concerned. So it's something which is the most critical internal as security threat, with the ramifications on the external security also, major ramifications in fact, okay? And something which deserves a much needed and a much longer term and a nuanced attention. So since we are talking about radicalization, I prefer to begin with the theoretical understandings first. So as a concept, radicalization, we can categorize it as a radical behavior as well as radical ideology. So the radical ideology may lead to a radical behavior, but not necessarily. This is something which I'm talking at an individual level. A radical behavior, radical ideology, which is having extreme views pertaining to something. It can be anything. It can be environment. It can be a particular ideology. It can be a religion. Anything pertaining to that. One can have very extremist and radical views. Now, at an individual level, it may lead to radical behavior, or it may not lead to radical behavior. And by radical behavior, I imply violence. And terrorist violence certainly falls in that category. Now, at an individual, certainly it may or may not lead, but then we have organizations, a very systematic, established organizations having a proper bureaucracy, official hierarchical structure. There are organizations, well-established organizations with hierarchies and bureaucracies practicing a belief in radical ideology and creating conditions, working very systematically and in an organized manner to create conditions where the belief in radical ideology leads to radical behavior, which means an organized terrorist violence.
So I was talking about some of the organizations which practice belief in radical ideology, and they work in a very systematic and organized manner to convert, to transform that belief in radical ideology into a radical behavior. Now, talking about such organizations, I mean, right now I'll just give a few examples. Later on, I'll get into the details. Suppose if we have PFI, Popular Front of India, or Jamaat-e-Islami in Kashmir. They believe in the in the ideology of political Islam, or to bring in a system of Islamism. So they will be working in a very consistent, systematic manner and a very organized manner to create conditions where your radical belief leads to a radical behavior. Okay. Then there are people who are anarchists. Then you have organizations, ultra left-wing organizations, and even we have radicals in the environmental side also, like people who are green radicals. Okay. So, so I just giving the examples. But in this in my ongoing presentation, I'll be mostly focusing on the Islamist radical organizations because I mean in the limited time, it's not possible to cover all of them. So when the organized, organizations working or practicing belief in radical ideologies, and working towards converting them into radical behavior, they have some larger aims, and such aims are much, I would say, they have a very broader and a wider scope, and such aims are geopolitical in nature, political in nature. Like suppose instance, they would start targeting minorities, cultural minorities, religious minorities, ethnic minorities, and they would like to bring in a certain kind of a system, a certain kind of a ruling regime. For instance, communist or an ultra left-wing radical organization would want to bring a communist regime. An Islamist radical organization would want to bring a Sharia governed society or something like that. Now, again, coming to another conceptual part of it, when we talk about radicalization, people often conflate, like, they would say like, okay, this terrorism is, people got radicalized due to the poverty, due to some kind of state repression. Okay? And in other cases, he got radicalized because of ideology. But here we have to make a very, very, I would say, sensible distinction. In cases where people, are resorting to, I would say, terrorist violence or a very radical behavior because of some particular experience in their life. Okay, now, suppose they are seeking revenge. Okay, because of the state atrocity, or some particular psychological experience, or some event which happened in their life which made them very angry with the system or very angry with the society, and they become rebels or they become violent. For example, dacoits, which we had in the Chambal area or even in Rajasthan in the past. Okay, there were people who were frustrated with the system, with the social systems, and to seek revenge, they became radical. Okay, the Sri Lankan Tamils, whatever happened in Sri Lanka, the state repression, this, that, and they had a demand for this autonomy, the separate homeland, separate country. They became radical. Okay. So likewise, this is a very different kind of radicalization, and often I would say precipitated by anger or state repression. Okay? Such radicalization is of a temporary nature. You can always have solutions for them through political dialogue, consensus, some kind of resolution, some kind of talks, because they are intended towards a particular objective. Yes, we want a homeland. Okay, fine. If you have a dialogue system for the homeland, we are willing to whatever, like leave arms or this, something like that. Okay, and we are willing to come to talks, come to terms, to come to table. But then in the other kinds of radicalization, which is ideological, it's very different. Unlike the previous one, which is more or less a reaction to a particular event, the ideological radicalization is not a reaction. I mean, it exists in its own right. It doesn't matter whether the other people, like, they like you or not, whether they have done or not. If they don't fit in your ideology, if the system that is existing does not align with the system that you want to believe, that you want to bring in, then they become like, something worthy of being destruction, worthy of being eliminated. For example, in political Islam, we have a doctrine called takfiri. So any non-conformist Muslim or a non-conformist non-Muslims, he become wajibul qatl, completely worthy of being eliminated. Okay. So extreme radical ideologies like extreme Wahhabism, even for that matter, radical Deobandis, they have such doctrines, that for instance, Shia community. So I was, so during my research in Kashmir, I've been talking to various clerics from the Wahhabi community, from Ahle Hadith. I used to ask them very frankly that, what's the issue? What's your take on Shias? I mean, you don't have any individual hatred with them. You don't have, I mean, we don't see any kind of individual disturbance, but why are they so adamant? Then the fellow replied, yes, I agree that there is no individual hatred, there is no individual animosity or revenge, but it's something which is systemic, which comes from the ideological part. I asked him, what do you want? They said that, well, either they should say that, well, we are not Muslims, okay, we are perfectly fine with that, then we don't kill them. But if they are saying that, okay, we are Muslims and we are not, doing what the extreme Wahhabi doctrines say, and we continue to practice Shia beliefs, then they become wajibul qatl. Similarly, likewise, Ahmadiyyas also become wajibul qatl because they are not, fitting in the framework which they propagate or which they believe is the most appropriate and the rightful framework of Islam. So in this ideological radicalization, a person may be very nice to you in a personal relationship, okay, he can be a great friend, this that, but yes, when it comes to a very a larger system, a larger level, like a social level, official level, or at an organizational level, at a community level, they want to change the system, they act in a manner which is, which befits an enemy, they want to bring in a different system. So this is the ideological radicalization part. Okay. Yeah. And another important aspect in this concept of ideological radicalization is the otherization. Okay. So the people who don't stick to your belief, your ideology, they are considered as others. It's the elimination, exclusivism. Okay. And then the dehumanization of the others. They are taught that yes, the people who don't subscribe to your ideology, they are not humans. They are much below the human category, and they deserve to be killed. So during my interaction with various surrendered militants and even the active OGWs in Kashmir, so most of them were radicalized in Jamaat-e-Islami madrasas. Some of the Lashkar cadres were radicalized in Pakistan. So I used to interact with them. I mean, what exactly is the part of your training process? Then a fellow who is currently a de-radicalized person, and this fellow was a Lashkar terrorist, and after that, earlier he was radicalized in Jamaat-e-Islami madrasa, then joined Lashkar-e-Taiba organization. He was caught in a cop killing, went to jail. In the jail, he did two masters, one in Islamic studies and one in the international relations. Now he's out of jail and he's a reformed character. So I asked him, what goes in the mind? He said that, well, it's a very systematic process of your brainwashing and your, mind manipulation. And we are taught that if you're killing some person, then you're not doing anything wrong because that person deserves to be killed. He's an other and he's not a human being. So this dehumanization part is very strongly filled. It's injected into the minds of these terrorist cadres, the OGWs. And after that, once you are able to rationally convince yourself, morally convince yourself, if you say that it's your religious duty, then it's not difficult. Okay. And not surprisingly, this process can happen at a much, much wider level. Okay. I can tell you from my experience of Pakistan and Kashmir, so like when it comes to Ahmadiyyas and when it comes to Shias, okay, I have friends who are very educated people. They are journalists, highly qualified. Some of them even went to US to study and did their masters. And currently they regularly come on national television channels and all. And then they say that when it's about Shias, okay, yes, I mean they wouldn't say it on the television, but they believe it deep down inside, and even private conversations they would say yes, they deserve to be killed, because there was an organized, I would say, effort over a long, long time to make such doctrines socially legitimate. In the most recent example, this Shia leader from, I think, Wasim Rizvi from UP, when he lodged a petition to reform or to remove some verses from the Quranic scriptures. There's a very famous journalist in Kashmir, very educated fellow. He tweeted that, if India had been an Islamic country, this man would have been beheaded. But since this is not an Islamic country, strongest action should be taken against him. So this, in a way, shows the ideology, the deep down subconscious mindset of that person. Oh, what I want to say is that these things can be legitimized at a much larger level, at a much wider social level, and they can become a normal phenomenon in society. For example, about the Ahmadiyas, okay, if you go to any normal person, I mean, random people, those who are very non-violent people, those who are very practicing common people, okay, and in their opinions, they would say, yes, they are wajibul qatl, they are not Muslim. Okay? So this is the part, yes, now. Now I'm coming to the main outfits in India, just to understand, like, how do they operate and what are the activities they indulge in. Okay, so before that, I'm mostly focusing on Islamist organizations. Okay, I'll just briefly discuss what are the main schools that flourish in India. So the majority, I would say, are around 80%. We have Barelvi Muslims in India. And Barelvis are known as Athkadis in Kashmir, and we also call them Sufi Muslim. Okay, and Barelvi Muslims, they are the most distinguishing mark of their belief system is that they say that we love Prophet. So Nabi se mohabbat karte hain. That's a term which they use. And they are very obsessed about this Prophet part. Okay, and they would visit mazars and fakirs and peers and saints and all, and because of this, coexistence of over the last 1,000 years, many traditions, they have also, I would say, borrowed many traditions from Hindus, and Hindus have also, borrowed several traditions from the Barelvi sect of Islam, like, worshipping mazars and worshipping saints and fakirs and all. So you can see a lot of intermingling. This whole concept of Ganga Jamni Tehzeeb, this basically, when we are talking about Ganga Jamni Tehzeeb, we are essentially talking about the Barelvi followers, okay, at large. Okay, but then yes, normally people just try to paint this as a very rosy picture that I mean, with Barelvis there is no problem, and all your problems are with Wahhabis or Devbandis. Well, I don't think so. No? Your facts, your things on the ground speak otherwise. Most of the communal rights which take place in country in which in the Hindu Muslim communal rights, okay, which are mostly on the communal polarization grounds or religious hatred, whatever. Barelvis are an active participant in that. Okay, and then in Pakistan recently we saw this whole movement of Tehreek-e-Labbaik movement, which was a very extremist Islamist movement in Pakistan, and they even spoke of they said that what's the government doing with all its nuclear weapons? France is becoming a place for the insulting of Islam. So why don't we do something? Just throw the French ambassador out. And there was a nationwide protest upsurge almost against the government. Okay, but Tehreek-e-Labbaik, a Barelvi movement, was involved in that. Mumtaz Qadri, who killed Salman Taseer, the governor of Punjab, who mildly defended Asia Bibi in a blasphemy case. So this Mumtaz Qadri was a Barelvi Muslim. Okay? And Mumtaz Qadri, he got his inspiration of becoming a Ghazi, a Mujahid, from the fellow who killed Mr. Hansraj, because that was back in 1920s. There was a famous text called Rangila Rasool, which this Punjabi journalist had published, and it was considered as something very offensive to Prophet. So that fellow was killed by Ilmuddin, and Ilmuddin was declared a Ghazi. Mumtaz Qadri got inspiration from him. And when Mumtaz Qadri killed Salman Taseer, after that his funeral procession was carried in the entire Pakistan, and if the pictures are even now available on Google, you can just see the kind of massive following which he got. It was a super extraordinary following, as if he's some kind of a celebrity, some kind of a superhero, a big religious hero, a Ghazi. That kind of popularity he got. So this popularity speaks volumes about the mindset of an average common person who believes in that particular sect, or who believes that Mumtaz Qadri was right in killing Salman Taseer. In the Indian partition movement, Barelvis were a major force behind that. They actively participated in the Indian this partition movement. Even now, suppose and especially of late, over the last 3 to 4 decades, the foreign Islamic ideologies are making headway into India, and they are spreading very fast. Most important is the Wahhabi Islam, okay, and they get major funding, the petrodollar funding from Gulf countries, and which is why they are able to create big institutions. So now, because of that, the Barelvi sect is facing a major threat. Another threat, that's an existential threat, which they are facing from is from the Deobandi Islam, okay, the Deobandi leadership, which constitute around 20%, 15 to 20% of Muslims in the Indian subcontinent, and originating from Deoband in UP. So now Deobandis and Wahhabis, they are quite similar to each other. Okay. First of all, let me just differentiate between Deobandis and Barelvis. Barelvis and Deobandis both believe in the Hanafi school of Islamic jurisprudence, and Deobandis also believe in the, I would say, Peers, but then they don't believe in the worship of the mazars. And their ideology is way more closer to the Wahhabism than to the Barelvis. Okay. And Deobandis, we can say that, no, I mean, it's pretty much, I would say, very akin to the Muslim Brotherhood of Egypt, something like that. And Deobandis say that the Barelvi people are apostates, they are worshipping mazars, and they have imbibed many Hindu practices, so they are not proper, they are not pure and austere Muslims. So in the rural hinterland areas, when the Deobandi Islam is spreading, they face a massive, stiff resistance from the local Barelvis. I can just give you one example from my city itself. So Deobandis have been making major efforts over the last few decades, to spread their sect and their influence here. In one instance, a Deobandi Muslim was buried in a Barelvi graveyard. And after that, Barelvis were so upset that they exhumed his body and took it out and just brought it back to his home. And they said that, well, you can't just bury him in our graveyard, and you just put him there. Okay. So this is the kind of resistance which they are facing. But then certainly, I mean, Deobandis have much more money and political might behind them. Yes, I also talked about Wahhabism. They, in terms of monetary strength, they are far superior. Okay. Now, given these existential threats, Barelvis are also trying to, I would say, reform themselves. Now, this reformation is not something very evolutionary. This is anti-evolutionary. So if these guys say that, well, I mean, we are purist, or practicing the purest form of Islam, Barelvis are becoming more fanatic, and more fundamentalist, more extremist, just to prove that they are more, I mean, they are pure, and their love and their worship for Islam and Prophet is far more superior to these people. And we can see that in Kerala. In Kerala, I mean, I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of this famous leader. He is a Barelvi leader and a Barelvi Sufi leader. So he poses himself as a counter to the Wahhabi organization and the Wahhabi ideology. But then if you listen to his lectures and speeches, he comes out as much more, I mean, it's quite fanatic, just in the same vein as Wahhabis or Deobandis are. In Kashmir, Barelvis are popularly known as Athkadis, and Kashmir has a much profound Sufi culture. So I would say, I mean, this intermingling has taken deep roots in Kashmir. But then once again in Kashmir also, 70% of your militants, around 60 to 70, they come from the Athkadi sect. Most of the Hizbul Mujahideen cadre, in 90s and even in late 2000s, they came from the Athkadi sect. Now, with the spread of this Ahle Hadith sect, which is the other name of Wahhabism, Ahle Hadith, Salafi, you can call them Salafi, you can call them Ahle Hadith, you can call them Wahhabism. There are minor differences, but in Kashmir, all these three names more or less represent the same entity and same organization. Now, with the spread of the Ahle Hadith, you have many militants coming from that ideology also. A good number, good chunk. Okay. Now coming to the Deobandi organization, Deobandi again is a very, it's a very fundamentalist and a very, I would say, an organization which believes in a very literal interpretation of Islam, and Deobandis are spreading very fast in India. Okay, they are centered in UP, and interestingly, in the Indian partition movement, the Deobandi leadership opposed the idea of the partition of India. And that's why, I think Mr. Madani was the chief of Deoband then, and he is portrayed as a very patriotic and a nationalist leader. But then, if you dig deeper into the reasons why he was against the idea of the partition of India, reasons, they just shock you, they surprise you. For them, it was that Pakistan is already a Muslim-dominated place, and since our most important duty is dawa, the spread of Islam. If a place is already Muslim dominated, then you don't have much to do. So you need a very wider field where you can practice and you can bring more and more people into the ambit of your ideological fold, your religious fold. So his reason was that. And interestingly, since he opposed partition, he became very close to the political leaders of those time and the ruling dispensation after India's partition. And because of that, Deobandis have occupied very prominent political offices, especially after the partition, very high offices in academia, in politics, and several other places. And that's why we see that Deobandis are, in terms of education, in terms of economic status, they are, much better than the Barelvis. And you find Barelvis economically, educationally, in a very backward position. Okay. And then coming to the Deobandi ideology is a focal point of, it's a main ideological backbone of Jaish-e-Mohammed and Taliban. Okay. Now here we have to differentiate between the Pak Deobandi and Deobandi of India. Okay. Certainly, officially, the Indian Deoband says that, well, we completely denounce terrorism and we have nothing to do with them. But then, if you look at the investigations, if you look at how Jaish cadres operate in India at a very unofficial, private level, in a very informal manner, there are deep-rooted contacts and deep-rooted ties. Okay, Deobandi ideology was very prominent, very powerful in northwestern frontier province. This Balakot was one of the a main center of the Deoband and also the Wahhabism in 1800s. Okay, so Jaish-e-Mohammed, which is centered in that area, strictly believes in Deoband ideology. Taliban also practices Deoband ideology. Okay. So we can, it's why I'm mentioning this here is that this is something which poses a grave threat to India, because in case Deobandi spread across the country, it can facilitate these terrorist organizations to establish sleeper cells across the country. And generally, people prefer to say that organized entities like Jaish and all, they are very Kashmir-centric terror groups. Okay, but well, I beg to differ. Over the last many years, they have spread their very, I would say, deep-rooted bases across the country. And such ideological affiliations and their followers have certainly helped them in a large measure. Then now I come to the Wahhabi ideology, and Wahhabi ideology is something which which says that there has to be no mediator between the God, between Allah and the lay devotee. Okay, and they believe that they believe in a complete literal text-to-text interpretation of the text of Quranic scriptures. And so they say that anything which is not which cannot be literally interpreted or which goes against the basic domains of the text is not something which we subscribe to. And people who subscribe to such things, they are not Muslims. That's why we see a very strong resistance to all the practices which have come into Islam from other faiths, like the grave worship and worshipping saints and various other practices. Okay. Wahhabism has inspired Lashkar-e-Taiba. Lashkar-e-Taiba formally believes in the Wahhabi ideology, and this Al-Qaeda believes in the Wahhabi ideology. ISIS believes in the ultra extremist Wahhabi ideology. Okay? Though Saudi claims to be the official head of the Wahhabi ideology, because there's this history behind us. There was a pact between the Al Saud dynasty and Maulana Abdul Wahab, that yes, if you keep supporting the clerical structure Wahhabi, we support you, your regime. Okay, and then we came across what happened in 1979, this Islamic revolution in Iran, the siege of Makkah Mosque, and after that there was again a very strong pact between the Wahhabi clergy and the Saudi regime, that if you support the clergy across the globe, then we'll support your rule. And after that, Saudi regime started pumping the huge amounts of money in the Wahhabi spread across the globe. And we saw Wahhabism spreading majorly in India and in Europe also. Okay. In Kosovo, for example, the most interesting example is of Kosovo. In 1996, when Kosovo became independent, you could see people hailing Bill Clinton as a great hero and as a liberator. You could find females walking around the streets in shorts, and a completely westernized country. But then now, if you see the statistics lately, then you'll find that Kosovo was one of the major suppliers of foreign cadres to ISIS, from the Europe. And later it was revealed that the Wahhabis did a massive radicalization campaign in Kosovo post 1996 until 2010, even later. Even the Barcelona attacks, the Spain, it was revealed, the investigations revealed that the 20 years before the Barcelona attack, Wahhabis were very active there. In Kashmir, Wahhabis are becoming a very strong force. Now they constitute around 15% of the population, or maybe even more than that. In 2011, they were constituting 15%, and there were 700 mosques in 2011. Now, I don't know, there is no official figure, but as far as unofficial estimates go, there must be more than 2,500 mosques. And they pay much higher salary to the imams because they have better funding. Their mosques are much better built, and you can identify their mosques with their architecture. They are built in an Arab style, with the minarets and all. And interestingly, the Kashmiri Islam, the local Islam, had a very mild form of casteism. So the sheikhs, the sayyids, they always thought of themselves as some superior entities. But the Wahhabism, which is a foreign import, it treats everyone equal. So now a lot of people, there's this massive, I would say, migration, massive, movement towards Wahhabism among the locals, and they are abandoning their, their castes, which were prevalent earlier, and they are moving towards Wahhabism. So they have certain differences in the way they recite their namaz with the local Barelvis and local people. Okay? And interestingly, in Kashmir, you'll find that the Wahhabis, there are ties between Lashkar-e-Taiba and Wahhabis, and leaders like Masarrat Alam, who is a practicing Wahhabi and was also a member of Hurriyat. Currently, he's in jail. He had openly spoken against India, and he's a separatist, he's a terrorist supporter, Lashkar supporter. But then later, Wahhabis came to some kind of an arrangement, some kind of an understanding with the Indian security agencies, Indian, I would say, intelligence establishment, and even the Indian state. And that happened after the Maulvi Shaukat Shah, who was a Ahle Hadith leader, and later, he denounced terrorism, and he motivated many people to join the mainstream. And he was working with the Indian state in convincing people away from the terrorist line of thought. But then he was killed later. He was murdered by Lashkar. Okay? And after that, Wahhabis have been working in Kashmir. So in their mosques, they talk about Palestine, they talk about Rohingyas, they talk about global Islamist problems, and they propagate an ideology which is very extremist in nature. But they don't talk about Kashmir because that's because of a very subtle understanding with the state. So formally, we cannot say that they are practicing anything anti-India or anti-state, but the ideology which they are preaching, it says that everything in Islam, the idea of nation, the idea of multicultural society, idea of democracy, that is useless, that is completely, it is sinful, and it is secondary to the idea of your religious identity, the idea of Islam. Okay? So that kind of mindset is making a major, I would say, presence in Kashmir. And we can see that, the Kashmiri separatist movement earlier, which was mildly, I would say, political, now it has been completely hijacked by this Islamist tendencies. Just give me a second. I want to put my phone on charge, because there's this, the battery issue. Hello? Hello?
Yeah, you're audible.
Yes. Perfect. So I just mentioned about the Wahhabism, and now the impact can be seen at a very social level, something which has gone beyond this whole idea of separatism and Kashmir becoming an independent country, these have become very trivial things. Now it is a much more deeply rooted and at a very societal level. So I can just give you one example from a school visit that I did in Kashmir. So it was in Badgaon, Swaibag. Swaibag is the village of Sayyid Salahuddin, the fugitive, the head of Hizbul Mujahideen, and school was run by the National Conference management. Okay, now National Conference reportedly is a moderate Islamist party, and they call themselves nationalists. So in the class, I asked them, asked the students, they were like, it was a 10th class, and my interaction was with 10th class and 8th class students. There were girls and boys sitting in the class, and I said them that, well, I mean, if the Rohingya Muslims come to Kashmir, will you be fine with that? And all of them said, yes, we'll be fine with that. Okay. I asked them a question that, I mean, well, you are opposing the abrogation of Article 370 because you don't want outsiders to come and settle here. Why would you support Rohingya Muslims? They said that, well, they are our brothers, they are our Muslim brothers. They are the part of Ummah. So it's our duty to support them, and we'll be perfectly fine with that. Okay. Then I asked them, okay, fine. What about the Kashmiri Pandits? If they want to come back to Kashmir, and they all just, got up in protest, well, this cannot happen. We are not going to tolerate it. That this is, I mean, this is not going to happen. This is like India's, occupation, India's colonization of Kashmir. I asked them that, well, they were the part and parcel of this land. Okay. No, Kashmir is an Islamic country, this, that. Okay. So they started saying all that. Then I asked them that, well, how many of you like Zakir Musa? So Zakir Musa, just before I get into the answer, I would like to explain who Zakir Musa is. Zakir Musa was the head of Ansar Ghazwatul Hind, which calls itself which is the Al Qaeda affiliate in Kashmir. And Zakir Musa was previously the part of, he was a cadre of Hizbul Mujahideen, and he was in the same group which this Burhan Wani fellow was, okay. And Zakir Musa went to Navodaya Vidyalaya. Navodaya Vidyalayas are spread across the country, and I met some of his classmates, and they said that, well, he was a very shy and a reticent fellow in schools, and he would would always object girls wearing shorts and playing sports in the school. But then, he wasn't very violent. He would just simply devote himself to reading scriptures, and he was a very shy student in the class. Later, he joined Hizbul Mujahideen, and he found that even Burhan Wani was also in the same group. Okay, and Burhan Wani also, interestingly, both these chaps, these guys found that Hizbul Mujahideen wasn't sufficiently Islamic. They found that, this is an organization fighting for fighting a political battle. It's not a religious battle. They want political power. They're fighting for the land. They want to make this land Kashmir separate from India and access to join Pakistan. So this is a battle for the land. Our battle has to be Islamic. So Burhan Wani was killed, and before his death, if you look at his interview, I think it's on YouTube. He is also giving a call for the caliphate. Later, Zakir Musa left Hizbul Mujahideen and started Ansar Ghazwatul Hind. And he said that, well, this struggle has nothing to do with separate homeland and all. This is an entirely Islamic struggle. This is the struggle for the caliphate. Okay? And I'll just slit the throats of the Hurriyat leaders, because they have betrayed the cause of Islam. They have been with Pakistan. They have betrayed the people of Kashmir. He openly threatened the Hurriyat leaders. And Zakir Musa became a massive celebrity. Like, he was the most popular terrorist leader in Kashmir. Even the kids who were 7-year-old, 6-year-old kids, they loved Zakir Musa. If you go to schools, I have those pictures with me. Okay, in those, it's in my next book. I've even given those pictures. You can see the graffiti, Zakir Musa Zindabad, in the government schools. The kids would just, they would always worship Zakir Musa. They would go into stone pelting thinking of Zakir Musa. And in that class, I asked, how many of you like Zakir Musa? 90% of the class, including the females, they got up and said that we love Zakir Musa. And then 70% of the kids, they just got up and said that, yes, we want to join these terrorist organizations. So radicalization is, it's a very different ball game. Like, it's not confined to a particular organization. It makes its way at a much more deeper societal level. Now I'm coming to the other the Islamist organizations like Jamaat-e-Islami, okay, and PFI. Okay. So Jamaat-e-Islami, these organizations, in a very formal manner, they wouldn't propagate or they wouldn't indulge in any, I would say, violent activity. So Jamaat-e-Islami portrayed itself as a religious and a social organization in Kashmir, doing charity, and they're doing a lot of educational work. They run, thousands of schools across the Kashmir. Okay, but then these organizations like Jamaat and the PFI, interestingly, they also got ATG and 12A certificates from the government of India, which made them eligible for tax-free donations and a lot of other exemptions. They also got that FCRA certification, so they could get a lot of foreign funding. But then now, in essence, we have to understand what Jamaat is. Jamaat is a sword arm of Hizbul Mujahideen, and Jamaat has played the most lethal role over the last 3 to 4 decades in Kashmir. Jamaat, so Kashmir was initially Sufi, a very liberal, moderately Islamic entity, okay, and we can see that if you go back to 1947 or maybe 1965 or 1971, Kashmiri Muslims, the majority, it was not with Pakistan. They, to a large extent, supported Indian armed forces in whatever struggles we had with Pakistan, and this is the reason why Pakistan could not make much headway. Then they started promoting extremist organizations like Jamaat-e-Islami, just with the objective of radicalizing the society and ultimately completely Islamizing the society on Sharia lines, so that it makes the ground clear for Pakistan. And then Jamaat started getting into your educational institutions, your academic institutions, your police, your administration. They made a very strong presence. It has a very strongest grassroots cadre in Jamaat. They have rukuns, they have nazims. And it's very difficult to become a rukun. They have to go through several stages. And so the terrorist organizations burnt all the government schools. They destroyed them. They've set them to fire in early 90s and late 90s. After that, Jamaat got massively into the education sector, and they run thousands of schools across the state of Jammu and Kashmir. And in all those schools, they have much more. They have better infrastructure than the government schools. They have more money. So all these Jamaat people, all what they teach is highly radicalized Islamic curriculum. And interestingly, many of them get government grants. Jamaat constitutes the most powerful voter base of PDP. Jamaat has supplied a large number of recruits to terrorist organizations. Many terrorist formally it's difficult to prove. Why? Because what they do is that, first of all, they will get someone into a Jamaat madrasa, Jamaat seminary, teach them, radicalize them. After that, he is told that, you should formally resign from Jamaat, formally quit Jamaat. He quits Jamaat, and maybe after 6 months or an year or year and a half, he would just go and join a terrorist organization. And here, unfortunately, our intelligence officials, especially working in the domestic intelligence sector and the police officials, they have such an atrocious and a very pathetic understanding of these strategic matters that they are not able to understand these things. Okay? And then these Jamaat cadres get into terrorist organizations. Okay? And with such a robust presence in business, robust presence in academia, what do you expect? The entire state is going along a very anti-India, anti-state line. If you read Bashir Asad's book, he has given evidence, he has given several proofs that Mehbooba Mufti and Mufti Muhammad Saeed, they were hosting terrorists, the militant cadres in their homes, in their personal houses. Entire Jamaat leadership decides, who gets the elections ticket in South Kashmir, and PDP, this People's Democratic Party, is massively, it's completely vulnerable to the Jamaat vote bank. When these people were in power with the, because of Jamaat, through its influence, could get its cadres, entered as civil servants in the state administration, the police services, in academia. And now, once these people are in the police services, in CID, in the academia, you don't expect them to work in India's favor. The entire 2016 agitation, the post-Burhanwani agitation, was structured, planned, organized, and funded by Jamaat. Jamaat plays a very crucial role in terror funding. And now, interestingly, the ways are even more interesting. Okay? So they organize ijtemas, people donate money for a lot of religious purposes. That money, a part of that money goes into terror funding. Jamaat promises, assures its people that, yes, I'll get you recruited in the government service, I'll get you posted as a lecturer, I'll get you posted as an SDM or a police officer. You have to give some money to me. So that's a bribe which goes to a Jamaat operative. A part of that bribe goes to the terrorist organization or Hurriyat. And then when these people get into services, out of obligation, they keep donating a part of their salary to Jamaat. And then Jamaat has a major presence in the media also. All these newspapers like Greater Kashmir, Kashmir Images, okay, if you look at the content which they have published over the last 10, 15 years, that's totally anti-Islamic, anti-Hindu and extremely Islamist in nature, pro-Pakistan in nature. And most interestingly, they got maximum number of advertisements from the state resources, from our governments. Now this can go on endlessly. I just come to the some of the newer entities of having a great role in radicalization. I guess I should discuss more about Turkey now. So Turkey's president, Mr. Erdogan, okay, he has a very different geopolitical ambition, and India occupies a very strategic and a very prominent role in that geostrategic ambition. President Erdogan wants to be the new caliph. In 1923, it will be 100 years of the Treaty of Sevres, I guess, the dismemberment of the Ottoman Empire, which happened in 1923. So in 2023, it will be 100 years, and he believes that due to a certain constitutional clause, he can bring back the Ottoman Caliphate and he can be the caliph. So he has started, when his tenure started, completely Islamizing and radicalizing the Turkish political social scenario. He completely crushed the Gulen movement. Gulenists were out of, once they were out, he started purging the state administration, armed forces, intelligence. Done with that, he started weaponizing and supporting terrorist organizations and Islamist organizations across the globe. Now he knows that in the Arab world, his claim will be facing a massive resistance from the Arab leadership, because Saudi people, they claim that they are the leaders of Islam, the Ummah, and we all know about the historic fight between the Saud dynasty and the Ottomans, in which with the support of the Western powers, the Saud dynasty emerged victorious and Ottomans were uprooted. So he feels that yes, in the Arab world there will be resistance, but then Ottoman Caliphate has a long history of influence in South Asia. So he feels that this large majority, overwhelming majority of Indian Muslims, especially in Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India, they will support him. And another important reason is that so the idea of Islam, which President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, he wants to propagate, is not very rigid like Wahhabism. Okay? He is radical, but he has a very strong, political and strategic calculations. He doesn't want the Muslim community to get into sectarian rivalries like Shia-Sunni rivalry or Barelvi-Deobandi rivalry, things like that. He wants to unite them and become the sole leader. So his idea of, his model of Islamic leadership will be more acceptable to the Barelvis in India, even to the Wahhabis in India, because lately Saudis have become very close to Americans, to Israel, and to India. So Saudis are a discredited entity in Kashmir. Now people don't like Saudi, but Turkey is a new hero, new leader of Islam. Why? Because they have taken a major stand on all the Islamic issues. President Erdogan has deep-rooted ties with Jamaat-e-Islami in Kashmir, with Popular Front of India, and we have there is enough evidence now. In fact, I was writing back in 2018 December about Turkish intervention in India, and they were doing it in a very subtle and a silent manner. They were reaching out to the Muslim diplomats, Muslim bureaucrats, Muslim business leaders, the religious leaders. They were making an outreach to the leaders at the level of a locality, of a mohalla. They were reaching out to imams, and they were trying to find a stronghold in which in the areas where the Khilafat movement was strong back in 1920. So to put it on record, Khilafat movement was started by Mahatma Gandhi to bring back the Ottoman Caliph. It was a non-violent movement. Mr. Gandhi may have thought of uniting Hindus and Muslims, but unfortunately, that was the biggest strategic blunder of him, and it paved the way for the communal politics and separatist politics in India. And on record, that was the first non-violent jihad to bring back the caliphate. And the second attempt to bring back the caliphate was done by ISIS. So the credit for making the first effort to bring back the caliphate goes to Mahatma Gandhi ji. And the second, but it was a non-violent movement, and the second effort was done by ISIS. Okay, so for making the violent effort, credit goes to ISIS. And after ISIS, the idea of caliphate has become very popular. So now everyone wants to be the caliph. Okay. And then Mr. Erdogan, he is not also emphasizing on Shia Sunni differences. Therefore, he has come to terms, make some kind of a tactical arrangement with the Iranian leadership, and here, they in Kashmir, because of that, arrangement with the Iranian leadership, the Shias in Kashmir are very comfortable with the presence of Turkey. And among the Shias, let me say that the Iranian leadership has a massive hold in Shias in Kashmir. If you go to Kargil, if you go to Badgam, you will find the entire city, full of the posters and hoardings of Khomeini. Kargil, which for 6 months it is cut off from the rest of the India. Okay, it has hundreds of hoardings of Khomeini, and not a single hoarding of Gandhi, or maybe any other Indian leader. Okay, Vivekananda, or whoever, even former Prime Minister Nehru, or no one. Okay, but Khomeini is all over the place. And so Iran was dealing with this Kashmir situation in a very ambiguous manner until lately. They had hidden sympathies. In the war of 1965, they supported Pakistan. In a very unofficial manner, they gave their airfields to Pakistan. Even in the Kashmir separatist movement, they always had hidden sympathies, but they were not coming out open because of some tactical and economic reasons. India was buying oil, and we have cultural historical ties. And the Kashmiri movement was extremely Sunni movement, so Shias always felt that they won't be secure in this if this place ever gets liberated. But over the last 3 to 4 years, the majority of Shias have become anti-India now. No? And I can cite examples and evidence for that. If you look at just start reading newspapers and the articles from 2019-18, all the Muharram, every year the Muharram processions have anti-India sloganeering. Maulana Jawad Naqvi of Pakistan, he is working massively to make Shias of Kashmir anti-India. And Pakistan is also very intelligent. Let me say that their intelligence establishment have a very fine understanding of strategic issues. This time, last year, they appointed a Major General rank officer, who is a Shia, by the way, as the head of ISI's Kashmir desk. And he was given a task of moving Shias away from the Indian fold towards the separatist fold. Iran was complicit in that. And now if you see all the Kashmiri separatist Shia leaders like Agha Hassan Badgami and all these chaps, they are totally anti-India. Likewise, Mr. Erdogan is not confining himself to Kashmir. He is working across the country. He's working, in the places in MP, in UP, in Kerala, and most importantly in those places where the Khilafat movement was at its peak. Like in Lucknow, Khilafat movement was at its peak. In Hyderabad, it was very strong. In Kerala, Khilafat movement was strong. In Calcutta, it was strong. So you have Turkish clerics visiting all these places, funding the local Islamist organizations, the local clerics. Okay? And their modus operandi is also very different. So for the messaging part, for the communication part, people who are not very well known, they visit Turkey, and they are given all the training and funding, and then they come back to India. And it's not simply confined to making ties with the Islamist clerics. Now, Mr. President Erdogan has a force called Sadat, which is like a paramilitary organization, something like the Blackwaters, which Americans have. So Sadat are well-trained commando elite forces in organizing terrorist attacks, civil protests, etc. And they are training jihadis in Syria. They are training jihadis in Libya. And reportedly, they have also appeared in Kashmir. And now after the abrogation of Article 370, Kashmiri terrorism scenario has completely gone into the hands of foreign terrorist organizations. And as per my reports and my analysis, Sadat has a presence, and which is going to ramp up in the future. And especially after the withdrawal of American forces from Afghanistan, Turkey and Sadat will have a very strong presence in Afghanistan, and they will train all the Kashmir-centric terrorist groups. And these guys are, they have the potential to wreak havoc, not just in Kashmir, but even in the other parts of India. And then these, Islamist organizations, they have other channels of operating also. So it's not just the terrorist organizations that they are working through. And they work through even formal official channels. Okay, and democracy becomes the easiest tool for them. Democracy is extremely vulnerable to them. So the students nowadays, Jamaat, and the organizations like PFI maybe, or even other Islamist organizations, people who are in their fold, they encourage them to write civil services examinations. Okay? And I can, cite evidence for that. They encourage them to write civil service examinations, and they say that, well, you have to get into state institutions. If you want to see the example, you can just see the model in Kashmir. the way they have infiltrated state institutions. And likely in the same manner, they are going to do that in India. Then we will have politicians like Owaisi who will be entering, who are totally Islamist in their belief and their outlook and behavior. No? These people will be making a massive entry, people like him in parliament, in administration, in police, in intelligence. Okay? In that case, you will have a de facto Sharia state, through proper democratic means. You don't even need to formally bring it. Okay? Through electoral and through parliamentary majority, you'll have blasphemy laws in the country. Because democracy is, after all about majority. A democracy is extremely vulnerable to such totalitarian ideologies. Now I'll just come to the last part of my lecture. Then we can discuss in the question and answers session. Yeah, that's the de-radicalization part, and how to address this issue. Well, I feel that this is something, first of all, right from the 1950s or 40s, our understanding of this threat has been extremely poor, very pathetic. Okay, we never, we could, always thought of it as some kind of a fringe problem or a law and order problem or a religious problem, something like that. Okay, but it isn't. No one focused on the ideology. And let me say, ideology is a very, very crucial part, which ultimately, paves the way for radicalization and ultimately the terrorist violence. Okay. Ideology has always acted as a major polluter and spoiler of minds. So just a minute. And these are totalitarian ideologies. They would want a complete system to run and function in according with the, what they believe, what they subscribe to. So gradually, slowly and slowly, they would just try to, invade your system. First, they will be in a very, I would say, polite manner, in a legal manner. And once there is a sufficient clout and sufficient power, the methods will become more and more violent. Hello? Hello?
Yes, Abhinavji, you're audible.
Yeah, yes. So the methods will become more and more violent. Okay, So there's, in this matter, somewhere we lacked in our understanding. Over the last 3 to 4 decades, PFI has made a massive presence in Kerala. There were reports, IB was sending continuous reports to the central government, but nothing happened. Likewise, Jamaat-e-Islami in Kashmir, most interestingly, Jamaat-e-Islami was nurtured by the Congress party, which was at the center in 70s. And the reason why? The reason was very simple. Sheikh Abdullah was very powerful. National Conference was very powerful. And, the central parties suspected that, he was having independence ambitions, not without reason. Certainly he was having. So in order to weaken him, these extremist groups went to the central leadership and said that, well, if you strengthen us, we will counter Sheikh Abdullah, we will counter the National Conference. So our systems were befooled. We could not foresee the long-term threat. And again, we did the same mistake, Later on, when Atal Bihari Vajpayee started all this, Kashmir outreach, methods, again we were befooled. They made, those systems made Hurriyat an extremely powerful organization. Now, Hurriyat, considering the fact that Hurriyat is an extremist Islamist organization, okay, fine, they represent people, but what they represent? They represent a terrorist and an extremist ideology. Are we going to talk to them through democratic methods? Or should we have out-of-the-box solutions to deal with them? What constitutes their strength? Their strength is constituted by organizations, that established and united organizations like Jamaat-e-Islami. So in case, if we decide not to talk to them and through some other strategy, liquidate these organizations, they will become very weak and new leaders will come up. Because, even these organizations like Jamaat and all, they thrive on terror and threat. Even if some people want to, oppose them, they don't oppose them because, they're scared of getting shot dead. Like the way Shujat Bukhari was shot, the journalist in Kashmir who started, opposing, who was writing some things against Pakistan, he was shot next day. In Kashmir, if you go for voting, you will have Jamaat cadres walking, standing on the roadside and, they'll be passing taunts. Okay, fine, you're going for voting. Okay, tomorrow you have to come back to the same village. So they create a social pressure. Threat letters will go to your homes that why you are not coming to Ijtemas. So instead of talking to these people, strengthening these people, giving them tax-free, tax exemption certificates, the state intelligence and the central intelligence agency should have tried to liquidate them. And let me put it on record, it has been an established trend across the intelligence world, across the globe, that you have to resort to covert methods to deal with such organizations, because with democracy and with democratic methods you cannot deal with a force which does not believe in democracy and which has a certain level of expertise in exploiting the vulnerabilities of democracy. But our people didn't understand. Once again, after Vajpayee, we once again committed the same mistake when we were supporting, nurturing Wahhabis. Since we have good ties with Saudis, okay, fine. There was an arrangement. Okay, Wahhabi said that we won't say anything against India. Okay, please, let us flourish. Okay, our systems are, cops, our intelligence people. Okay, fine. Okay, you just carry on. Unfortunately, the political leadership does not have the vision, doesn't have the time, doesn't have the clout, doesn't have the intellectual capability to deal with such matters. And in the intelligence segment, you have, mostly they are manned by people who are working as IPS officers in the state. Some person is a district collector, a district police chief, earning all the money from land mafia and doing some routine law and order work. Next day he's posted on deputation in IB. And that too he's sent to Kashmir or Northeast. He doesn't have an understanding of that area. I know people, I've come across officers, who wouldn't know the difference between the Jamaat and Jamiyat, who wouldn't know the difference between Devbandis and Barelvis. So with such a temporary understanding, and then there's a posting system, a person gets transferred, a person from Rajasthan gets posted as an inspector with the intelligence apparatus in Kashmir. He works there for 1 or 2 years, that too completely scared. He doesn't know Urdu, he doesn't know the local language, He just gets the assets, which were passed on to him by his previous, income, by his, the person who was there before him. And then he gets, by the time he is able to cultivate his own assets and his own network of informants, he is again transferred. And then there are people who are simply fooling our people. They are getting massive amounts of money from our intelligence establishment and providing completely useless pieces of information. I am giving you one recent example. So recently, yesterday, this whole Kashmiri leaders were called for a talk, by the Prime Minister. So almost a month and a half back, I was in Kashmir and I had found massive alienation in Kashmir, massive levels of alienation. Okay, now. I just discussed the issue with some people in the government that there is this issue, but later the official reports from the intel setup they were very different. They said that this alienation is there because there is no political leadership and the political vacuum has to be filled. Now this is a very, very flawed and a faulty understanding. There is an alienation, but the reasons are different. Alienation was there. Why? Because people expected after the abrogation of Article 370 that some good things will happen on the governance front. The major problem in Kashmir is your bureaucracy, which is very arrogant, which is very corrupt, which is completely haughty and elitist in nature. People have to wait for days on end outside the secretariat for getting their work done. And Kashmiri politicians especially the dynastic parties which ruled there for 5 to 6 decades, they were involved simply in corruption and appeasing Pakistan. Now, government was fed that, if you don't bring these leaders back, there will be some kind of a civil revolt or something like that. And, government, as usual, faulty intelligence gets transferred to the higher level. Now, at the higher level, you have senior officers, who feel that it is below their prestige to go at the grassroots level and, do some kind of intelligence collection analysis. They analyze, they make their reports based on the same faulty inputs. And then the flawed narratives go to the top. That yes, because since these leaders are not being talked to, people are alienated. People wanted these leaders to completely fade out because they were fed up with the dynastic leaders because of their corruption. People wanted a new political leadership. Now people are saying that, if you had to revive the same political leadership, why did you abrogate Article 370 in the first place? After the abrogation of Article 370, we needed a 10-year-long roadmap for that. Okay? And if you go to Vivekananda Foundation's website, I have drafted a long paper with a 10-year-long roadmap. Mr. C.D. Sahay, former chief of R&AW, he is my co-author in that paper. Okay? and it discusses in detail what has to be done. Most importantly, you have to crush Jamaat, because what we did, Government of India banned Jamaat-e-Islami, which is a very superficial measure. Nothing happens. It doesn't work that way. No? Once Jamaat-e-Islami was banned, they hibernated into the they hibernated into the rural areas, and from there they started working. They were having their sway, and they created their cadre, and now you have a massive chunk of foreign terrorists operating in Kashmir. After 370, they should have utilized the time and resources to completely neutralize Jamaat, and that would have required a 2-year-long project, not an ad hoc and random measure. So unfortunately, we have a very poor understanding, and in the future, I mean, it's a very long and a detailed topic, but if you ask me some very key takeaways, I have a few suggestions. First of all, I think we should have an instrument of national radicalization index for the entire country. Such an index should be based on indicators, and it can be a statistical tool. Those indicators include things like, the arrival of foreign clerics in a local area, the arrival of foreign funding in a local area, the creation of new mosques in a local area, the number of people, analyzing their social media posts, number of people making visits to, the Islamic countries in that particular area, okay? Number of students, going to the religious seminaries in that particular area. There are various ways, to have this this kind of a radicalization index, and then once you measure this once you have this index for a particular district, for a particular state, you can come out with appropriate measures. In my book, Radicalization in India, an Exploration, I have given the theoretical structure of this index, which is in the last chapter. I'll just share the cover of, this book. It's here. And the book, discusses very comprehensively about the radicalization problems in India and the various schools that are involved in radicalization, and also the measures that we need to initiate. Okay. And the second measure, I feel that we need to revamp our, I would say, intelligence infrastructure. Okay, with a very proper understanding of such threats, such existential threats to our country, and the people, like and there has to be some empowerment of the agencies. Okay, I mean, they're not simply sitting there to collect intelligence and write reports and send it to the central government, and those reports are dumped by the bureaucrats sitting in Home Ministry. I mean, if that's the case, then there's no purpose. There has to be some empowerment and some action. And lastly, I feel that certainly, religious texts and they will always have a problem. And these religious texts. We are not going to talk about the Reformation and the the correction in those texts, because that may be a very politically sensitive issue. That is something which has to be left to the religious authorities only. But at our stage, I feel that any radical ideology can work only if there is a sufficient infrastructure available for that. And that infrastructure includes leadership, money, finance, and an organization. So you have to hit at the finance and the organization. So make sure that we don't let organizations like PFI and Jamaat-e-Islami flourish in the country. They should be neutralized and they should be annihilated. If we can assure that, we can be, certain to a great degree that even with the radical ideology practiced by people in their individual lives, we are safe, because there are no organizations. Like the government did this in Kashmir. NIA started investigating the terror financing cases of the Hurriyat. So NIA focused majorly on the organizations, the Hurriyat leadership. They went massively against the Hurriyat leadership. Okay, they got all the people in terror funding cases, and you can see it simply dismantled the terror infrastructure in Kashmir. But then we were very late in understanding Hurriyat as a threat. And for a long time, Hurriyat leaders used to travel to Delhi in chartered planes. Even if they would sneeze, they would be brought to AIIMS in chartered planes, and they would be straight away meeting with the Prime Minister of the country. So, at a fundamental level, the most crucial part is that, we have a very poor strategic culture. And that needs to be massively improved. And with this, I just, conclude. And thank you so much. And once again, my apologies for the technical glitches that happened in the beginning.
Thank you, Abhinavji. I think an excellent proposition, excellent way of presenting across think it took us through the whole lot of problems that are associated, so many strands within, so many splinter groups, and the way they perceive and the efforts that are made at the same time. It's the same government that also gets into different sort of problem. I think we will have around 15 minutes for discussion, 15 to 20 minutes, not more than that one. We have another talk at 4. So I would now request the students to take the chance first and then ask questions to Sri Abhinav. Sri Kutan, please unmute yourself and ask the question.
Thank you, sir, for a very comprehensive talk. It was excellent. So I have a few questions for you. So,
Yeah.
like one of them you answered anyway, but still. So first one is regarding this problem in Xinjiang. So when Chinese say that they are re-educating people in Xinjiang and trying to bring change in the people's minds, do you think that that will really be effective? Because like when we see people always have this kind of affinity towards their culture ingrained in their mind.
Mm.
So how to what extent? Maybe with the new generation or the younger generation, that may be possible. They may be exposed to Chinese values and so such kind of work may work with them. But how do you think it will work with the existing population, which amount to over like
Yeah.
millions? And
Thank you.
second, yeah, I
Yes.
have
Yeah.
two more questions.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yeah, go ahead.
like yeah. So second one is regarding like I was going to ask if IB needs a revamp because and you answered it yes, but I have noticed a few things because like I was a student of Central University and when we had this exams for MA for say national security, the exam was same as that for like other courses for general humanities courses, say for political science, IR. So the exam was same for those. So, like, it's not really checking whether the students have the aptitude or some kind of like knowledge about this thing. So, do we need to bring a change in our education system itself and say in the induction of officers too? Because we see that IPS officers or IFS officers, in some cases IAS officers. I don't think there are any IAS, but mostly it's either IPS or IFS officers who go to head the like row and such kind of agencies ranks, higher ranks. So they may not have a like a good understanding of how the agency works or how the intelligence system works. So do you think that we need to bring in a whole change in that thing? And thirdly, you also mentioned how that a number of organizations have been flourishing even under the government's watch. Like IB has been reporting, but the government is not like really been sensitive towards the growth of institutions like such for example PFI. So why is it that the government or the intelligence agency itself is having such kind of a lag in responding to threats? Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Very interesting questions, and very interesting questions, I must say. Coming to the first question, well, I see that I would like to say that the way Chinese have understood the problem, that is exceptionally impressive. They have perfectly understood the problem, and the reason why? Because they also believe in a radical ideology. It's the communist ideology, okay, which is just to leave the supernatural part aside, okay, which is very similar, quite similar to the Islamist radical system, okay. Communism is a totalitarian ideology, and political Islam is a totalitarian ideology. Communism wants to govern the entire society and state according to the communist principles, and though the people who differ with you, they are purged, they are executed. Something which we saw in the reign of Mao and Stalin. So likewise, in the Islamic system, the political Islam, all these organizations, they also want to run the society completely according to Sharia. Your education system according to Sharia, government according to Sharia. So since they are like birds of the feather flock together, like they come from the same league. So the way Chinese have understood the problem, that is perfectly fine, but their solution, the way they are addressing it, it is not a great idea, and their solution comes from their understanding of the problem. So if you see, the people who differ from their ideology, they are executed, okay. In the communist regime, it happened. Even in the Kashmir, okay, the people who are differing from the, Jamaat-e-Islami, or, the Wahhabis would kill even the Sufi Muslims who differ from them. So their solution is also coming from their understanding itself. But then I feel that in the longer run, this won't be effective at all, because, I would say, Islamism and Islam as an ideology or as a social religious force has much profound roots. And let me tell you, especially in the current global geopolitical scenario, if you see, then you will find that China, there is some kind of a crypto alliance emerging between China, Iran, Turkey, Pakistan, Qatar for that matter, okay, and and I mean most likely Saudis will also be moving closer to China. So it seems that the Islamist forces will they will use China to weaken the Western world, okay, which has to a large extent considerably weakened America after its long wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and all. They have become like it has impacted their morale and their strength and all. Ultimately, China and this Cold War and the struggle with China will weaken the West, and once the West is weakened, flaws in communism will emerge in China, because right now it's a system based on the single leadership of Xi. Once Xi Jinping becomes weak or old, then the people will, the internal contradictions and inherent problems in the Communist Party and communist system will also emerge. And why I say that, it's weaker as ideology in comparison to Islam, because in Islam, people have a very religious reverence for what they are doing, Communism doesn't have a religious reverence, like whatever it is, it's a very mechanical, academic sort of an inclination or loyalty, okay, that kind of affiliation. But the religious reverence, that emotional connect, makes you much more stronger than any intellectual or academic connect. Okay? So that way, in the longer run, I guess even these the Islamist organizations, once the communist regime weakens, okay, they will start overpowering these tendencies, okay. And anyways, the way China is dealing, that also violates many established human rights standards. And also, when you do that, especially connected, when you do that in particular with Islam, you get a very legitimate excuse for jihad, okay. So all what they are doing right now, okay, because here, see, jihad is an established concept, certainly that you have to do anyways. But if there is if you have good reasons, then it becomes much more easier to recruit terrorist cadres and create organizations and get funds from across the globe. Okay? So all these things will be utilized by these people, that the Islamist groups, to create more terror groups and get more people into the jihad fold. Likewise, let me say in India also, I'll just get a similar example. Though, well, I don't think that in India there is any infringement of minority rights. This is completely rubbish. Okay, nothing is happening. They are having a very peaceful life. Okay, and with all the rights and all. But yes, the narrative which is going on the media is very different from the reality. In reality, in Bengal, you saw after the elections, thousands of Hindus and BJP supporters were killed for their religious identity. Okay, for voting for a particular party, a right-wing party, they were killed, and they were killed by jihadist elements. But on TV, we every day hear about, this, where this polarization is a very strong phenomenon on your television debates. Okay, like last year, we discussed a lot about Tablighi Jamaat on TV. Okay, that this is an extremist organization, this, that. Okay. These days, we are hearing about this, religious propaganda, this, religious conversion racket. Okay, but nothing is happening in the real world. Tablighi Jamaat as an organization is linked to terrorist cadres in US. In France, 80% of your jihadis have come from Tablighi Jamaat. But what we did, we simply created a big ruckus on television, and that suits some political parties to get right-wing votes, okay? But in reality, nothing concrete is happening against them. But yes, the Islamist groups and the terror organizations, they are using this opportunity to propagate a narrative that, yes, the Muslims are being treated very badly, the minority is facing an existential threat. So please, do jihad, this, that, some things like that. Your second question, yes, we certainly need an improvement in the examination system, because just give me a second. I need to put this again on charge. So the Indian education system certainly needs a revamp, because unfortunately, we have a very common exam for recruiting IAS, IPS, IFS, and people like who get a lower rank, okay, and in case if he had chosen IAS, he gets into IPS, okay. Now he never wanted, okay, And then these days I see a lot of people posting on LinkedIn that, that I did MBA, and then I did, I was a professor, and then I joined IPS, so former IPS, former IAS, former MBA. So this shows, a complete, this lack of confusion, and I would say a foolish state of mind. So we don't want that. We want a specialized cadre. And then most interestingly, see, no, India had a very rich tradition of strategic literature and strategic culture. Okay. Now tell me, all our IR programs, they are teaching the thoughts of, realist school and liberal school and constructivism in the Western world. How many are teaching the thoughts of Vidur Niti? How many are teaching the thoughts of, this Niti Shatak Vairagya of Raja Bharathari? Okay. It's a text on statecraft. How many are teaching Kautilya in detail? So there are numerous texts, okay, and we have not worked on them. So these, strategic thought needs to be taught, and needs to be inculcated. Then only we'll be able to understand these issues, because as a society, country, we have an entirely different history. We have an entirely different, set of political and social challenges. So we need a different curriculum. Then the present system of recruiting police officers, intelligence officers, administrators, it's just a colonial hangover. And let me put it on record. Not only these people are highly incompetent and corrupt, but they are mostly, focused about their own power and prestige. Okay, and if you ask half of the people why would they, they want to join these services, they would simply either for a good dowry or for some kind of a power and status, and this has massively spoiled your system and your country. Your last question, why we have not taken action against the organization? First answer, our intelligence establishment failed to understand them, to read them as a threat, okay, because of their incompetence and lack of knowledge. Second, political opportunism. Okay, our politicians, they are, they have a very petty mindset, and they want to focus on their electoral base, and they're not worried about the long-term threats. That's why no action could be taken even when the reports were sent. And thirdly, our intellectuals and our public intellectuals, media, they also thrive on a very borrowed system of knowledge. I remember one very famous historian famously remarked, I am not naming him, but certainly you can Google it right now and get the name. He said that if Babri Masjid had not been demolished, Masood Azhar would not have become a terrorist. Now, what do you want to say? Tell me, such a scholar, such a historian, should we be acting against him, taking a legal action against him for defending a terrorist, or should we be adoring him as a great scholar? Another scholar said that RSS is like ISIS. Well, I have no inclination, no sympathies, no liking for RSS. Well, I have my many opinions against their strategy and all that. But there is no similarity between RSS and ISIS. Do a simple logical analysis. Get me the list of terrorist attacks in which RSS participated. Get me their literature in which they say that, all the non-Hindus or, the non-Indians, they should be crushed. All the Shias should be crushed. All the Muslims should be killed, or they should be amputated, or we should bring in a very Manusmriti based legal system. Get me one text. So a scholar, a historian who made such a statement, okay, he should be sued. We had historians who completely whitewashed the history of convergence, whitewashed the history of, I would say, temple demolitions. So scholars, intellectuals, even the media for that matter, they have been in the most recent case only, okay, this Kashmiri Pandit leaders, Ajay Pandita was killed in Kashmir. Okay. Even many local Muslims who joined BJP, they were killed by terrorist organizations in Kashmir. In Bengal, after the elections, Hindus were persecuted for their religious identity. But I don't see a kind of, media outreach against it, the way we see it in the cases of mob lynching or, beef lynching and all those cases. No petition was sent to United Nations. In the case of Kashmir, our organization did send a petition to United Nations and a couple of other international organizations. Okay. So these are these are my answers. Yeah.
Okay, Kiran.
Good afternoon, sir. I have two questions. One for the first one regarding topic which you just covered, in the erstwhile state of Jammu Kashmir, we see that the bureaucracy is overly populated with the localites. So with the reorganization and bringing in this the now UTs within the UT cadre, do you think it's an effective measure to change that trend in the bureaucracy? Second one is we see some reports regarding how the funds that are coming into madrasas are being channelized into these activities of terrorist organizations or radicalization for that matter. With the increasing advent of technology and things like cryptocurrency, do you think it's becoming more difficult to figure out and bring in measures to stop this financing?
Okay. Yeah. So the first part, yes, local bureaucracy, I mean, it has a massive, influence of local cadres and all, the Jamaat groups and all. But, see, let me put it on record, okay, we cannot completely discredit the local elements. Like, it's Jammu and Kashmir police. JKP has been the most powerful force against terrorism. Had it not been for JKP, we wouldn't have been able to tackle the militancy. Some of them are very highly capable and smart officers. Let me tell you, the DYSPs and the inspectors in Jammu and Kashmir police, okay, I have found them way more smarter and competent than senior IPS officers, in other states. But then the thing is that, yes, with this UT thing, we don't have to send a message that, we are removing the localites. You have to bring the localites, but you have to bring the right people and support the right people. There are a good number of nationalists who don't speak for the fear of these extremist organizations. You have to support them. You have to bring them in the services. You have to, I would say, eliminate the influence of extremist organizations. But then, yes, I mean, what's going to happen in the future? I have some serious doubts because, I mean, I don't know, government is, these days, there are many rumors of giving the statehood back to Kashmir and then bringing in some kind of, I would say, crypto form of 370 back through some other provisions. Okay, so now if the statehood is given back and the elections are held and the same old political leaders are brought back to power, then you can't do anything. Then you have like, you're as good as I mean, it's even better to allow Pakistan, than getting these people back into power, because, they are anyways proxies of Pakistan in Kashmir, So I don't know whether this is going to happen or not, because, considering the history of the, Indian states working and the slow thinking, incompetent handling, status quoism, lethargy, I don't think much is going to change. Okay, so we should not be, I'm not very hopeful. The second question, yes, with this cryptocurrency and new methods, definitely it's getting even increasingly more difficult to tackle the terror financing. So cryptocurrency is going to be a big challenge for you. Okay? But then you also have to keep in mind that, I mean, the terror financing has always been a problem. Even without the cryptocurrency, it was always difficult to handle the terror financing problem. Why? Because if money originates in some mosque in London, it reaches Karachi and then it reaches Kerala. It's very difficult to, bring the source, to task. Okay. Now, if a money is caught with someone, the last person in Kerala, holding money is not a crime. Or maybe it can be some crime. Okay, you can ask about the source. If he's not able to explain, you can jail him for some kind of money laundering or whatever. But then you can't, link it to the terror. So those are the challenges. So I suggest, I feel that in these cases, you will always have to go for some methods. You'll have to identify the key coordinators. See, even people, you cannot stop people from using cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency will be a very important factor in the future of the global economy, and someday you will have to rationalize, legalize, regulate cryptocurrency. I mean, sooner or later you'll have to do. But then there will be people using cryptocurrency channels to fund terrorism. Okay, you can always identify those people. You can always identify those coordinators, and then you have to decide how you get rid of them. Through legal methods, to I mean, non-legal methods, to covert mechanism. That's up to you. That's a call which a country's security apparatus has to take. Not me and you.
Okay, we'll have one last question by Mr. Gokul.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, you mentioned covert measures that should be taken to counter radicalization. Please explain about it. And also, there was a large-scale internet blackout in Kashmir during the abrogation of Article 370. Was it a good measure to counter radicalization in the Kashmir Valley?
Okay. So yes, first covert measures. Well, let me tell you. See, this is an established, I would say, method of statecraft across the world. Okay, and I mean, I'm just giving you some brief, but I'm not getting into the details. So that includes, I would say, I mean, targeted assassinations, covert eliminations, or getting these organizations, framed in tax frauds. Okay, and some kind of other activities like, I mean, terror related activities. So basically you have to liquidate these organizations, so I mean, now that's up to you, how either you get hold of some of their top leadership. Okay, if I know it's too problematic, then all the, I mean, all over the world you have political assassinations that take place, okay, so that can be one of the measures. You can get them in Al Capone strategy is a very good measure, okay, to get them framed in tax frauds, and then you can just, I mean, also close their offices, and then counter narrative is another method, just to get these organizations. So I mean, it's an entirely different chapter, which I guess on a public platform it may not be very appropriate to discuss the covert measures, how they are used and how they should be used with relevant examples. But I've already given you a hint of what can be done. Now, what was the second question?
About the internet blackout in Kashmir?
Yeah. So the internet blackout happened, see, because abrogation of Article 370 was a major step, and there were inputs that if this happens, there will be a reprisals, in the form of civil unrest or a massive terrorist attack. Now, in order to organize a major civil unrest or get people for stone pelting, you have to have, all these, the organizations that working in Kashmir, or maybe Jamaat or Hurriyat, okay, they use all these secret communication channels to get the people, to coordinate, to get the coordinators, and just mobilize all the people. So therefore, to avoid those casualties and human now if people organize, people come into revolt, then the security forces have no option left but to open fire. Okay, so now, so that's why our state decided to choose life over liberty. Okay? And then there was this communication blackout, and because of the communication blackout, the militant organizations for a very, very long time could not communicate between themselves, and even the coordinators could not communicate and mobilize people for social unrest or for terrorist attacks. Okay, and it was very helpful. It saved many lives. Yeah. Even the radicalization activities, got a major blow because most of these videos are made viral on WhatsApp and your Telegram and YouTube and all these things. Okay, so I mean, if you propagate, if you spread false videos, fake narratives, and these fictive, these things are which are manipulated, those fakes, deepfakes, it can get people into action, people into some kind of agitation, okay? And it can lead to massive casualties and a major human rights embarrassment for India at an international level. So it was a step required in the, as an ultimate necessity for the state security, for the people's security, for the public good.
Okay, I think we'll stop with that, and I would request my our student of the department, Mr. Kiran, to propose a formal vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, sir, for that enlightening lecture. It covered many key aspects pertaining to the topic, ranging from ideological to the behavioral angles of radicalization. A noteworthy point was the discussion on the various driving factors influencing terrorist organization, and you cited several examples of from your personal experience. That was good to hear. Further, the fact that the external the fact that the existential crisis and contesting views of various factions within one religion fueling terrorism is indeed a matter of national and strategic issue. You also mentioned about how radicalization is being done at a tender age and at the grassroots level. So these are some of the issues where the state must act upon. As a whole, the lecture has helped us to enhance our knowledge on one of the most dynamic issues concerning the entire world in this 21st century. So, on behalf of the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations, MAHE, I would like to thank you for taking out time from your busy schedule and enhancing in engaging with us. I would also request you to join us for many further talks and discussions, because in fact it's good to hear from experts like you on these key issues, and it does help us to build on a better narrative. I would also like to thank head in charge of the department, Dr. Nandakishore sir, and all the other faculty members for providing us with this platform for enriching our knowledge through the discussion. I would also like to thank Dr. Anand for preparing the poster for this lecture and coordinating the entire lecture. Finally, I would like to thank the audience from both within the institutions, institution and outside, for not only joining but also actively participating in the discussions. Thank you everyone.
Thank you, Abhinavji.
Thank you.
Look forward
Thank
to
you
seeing
very
you
much.
again.
Thanks a lot.
Take
It
care.
was a pleasure interacting, with such a wonderful audience. Okay, thank you very much.